By first light, Ray Caldwell had already split a quarter cord of lodgepole and stacked it in a neat, shoulder-high wall beside the shed, bark side out, ends squared like bricks. He did it the same way every morning in winter. 3 rounds from the chopping block before coffee, 2 after, enough to warm his hands and make the day feel accounted for. At 63, retired from smoke jumping and too far up canyon for casual company, he lived by lists no one asked to see. Pump the hand well before the line froze solid. Check the rabbit snares along the willows. Scrape the ice from the stock tank. Record wind direction, overnight low. Barometer trend in a black spiral notebook that sat on the kitchen table beside an empty chair. He never moved the chair. From the road below, if you could call the last rutted 12 miles a road, his place looked like a cedar knot, dropped in snow. 1 cabin, 1 shed, 1 fence line that needed mending every season because frost heave and elk and gravity all hated straight lines. The county plows stopped well before his gate most winters. He kept chains, a shovel, and no expectation of rescue. People in town said he liked it that way. That was partly true. The bigger truth was that 2 winters ago, his wife, Lila, had died of pancreatic cancer in a hospice room with fluorescent lights and windows that did not open. Ray had sat in a vinyl chair and held her hand while machines translated the body's surrender into polite beeps. When it was over, he drove home, split wood until dark, and never once told anyone he didn't know what to do with his hands if they weren't working. So he organized grief like firewood, stacked, squared, and not discussed. By 8, he had coffee gone cold on the stove and his weather entry done in block print. 14 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast, light northerly, new accumulation 2.5 inches. He capped his pen, pulled on his jacket, and walked the lower pasture to look for elk, sign crossing the fence. He didn't need the meat, didn't need the exercise either, not strictly. He needed his eyes sharp. Observation was the one habit from jumping fires that still made him feel useful in peacetime. He read ground like other men read gossip. A fox had threaded the draw before dawn. 3 mule deer had poured through crust near the cottonwoods. A hawk had dropped on something and missed, wing marks fanned in powder. Nothing surprising, nothing dramatic, exactly how he preferred it. In summer, he hauled cattle salt blocks up to the least meadow. In fall, he patched wire and replaced posts where windthrow took the corners. In deep cold, he tracked, because tracking demanded humility. You looked, and the ground answered, or it didn't. No speeches, no pity. No one asking if he was doing all right. He wasn't, but he was functioning, and functioning had become its own creed. By noon, he drove the old Ford down to the valley for fuel. Dog food for a dog that had died last spring, and whose bag still sat by the mudroom bench, and mail that was mostly seed catalogues and county notices. At McGrew's Hardware, he bought baling twine and a packet of stove gaskets. People nodded in the aisles. Ray nodded back. "Still getting snow up there?" someone asked. "Enough," he said. "You hear about that kid missing off Timberline Spur?" He paused with his hand on a shelf of spark plugs. "No." "College boy from Bozeman, went up solo day hike, didn't come back. They're running search teams again tomorrow." Ray grunted once, not agreement, not dismissal, and paid for his things. Missing hikers happened every few seasons. Bad map reading, weather arrogance, one wrong traverse that became a lot of wrong distance. Usually the mountain gave them back quickly, alive or not. If search crews were still out after 3 days, then weather had done what weather does. Stripped options. At dusk he was back home, feeding the stove, penciling one last weather line, when headlights rolled slowly into his yard and stopped crooked near the gate. Sheriff Dina Morales climbed out first, collar up against the wind, And behind her came Nate Brewer from County SAR, his orange jacket crusted with old snow. Ray met them on the porch before they knocked. "Evening," Morales said. Her voice had that careful flatness officials used when they were delivering news that could become paperwork. "Sorry to come late. Something wrong? We found your missing hiker, alive." Ray waited. "Where?" he said. Morales looked past him toward the dark slope of his lower pasture. "Near your fence line. Dawn Patrol spotted him just above your east gate. Barefoot, wrapped in a torn emergency blanket. Dehydrated, mild frostbite. Probable exposure. He was clutching—" She glanced at Nate, who held up a clear evidence bag. Inside lay a strip of braided cedar bark, finger-thick, maybe 18 inches long, worked tight and deliberate like cordage. This. Ray took one step closer, eyes narrowing. Not paracord, not anything from standard backpacking kits. Not decorative either. Utility braid, old technique, fresh fibers. "Name's Ben Sutter," Nate said. 20, student. We had 3 teams in that basin for 2.5 days. Dog teams, thermal from the air when cloud sealing let us. Nothing. Then he pops out at your place. Why barefoot? Boots gone. Says he lost them in Scree. Hard to square with where we found him. Morales tucked her hands into her pockets. Clinic says he keeps repeating practical details. Drank snowmelt, sheltered under rock, followed water downhill. But when we ask what happened above tree line, he goes rigid. Rigid how? Like a board. Starts shaking. Won't look at anybody. Nate exhaled frost. He did say one thing before clamming up. Don't go up there after dark. Then nothing. The wind pressed against the porch and found gaps in the boards. Ray looked at the cedar braid again. He had seen woven willowfish traps, horsehair rope, old ranch knots you couldn't buy in stores. This wasn't from a factory. Somebody had made it by hand with time and intent. Could be he got turned around and spooked himself, Morales said, but she didn't sound convinced. Could also be we missed a hazard. Shaft, unstable cornice, somebody living rough up there, animal den, anything that could hurt the next person. And you're here because you know every drainage from here to the ridge, because crews are exhausted and weather's closing in, and because if we send more volunteers blind, somebody else could get hurt. Ray leaned one shoulder to the porch post. You want me to retrace his route? We want an experienced eye, quietly. No media circus. Morales' jaw tightened. Town's already buzzing with ghost stories and predators and conspiracy junk. I need facts. Ray could have said no. He had no badge, no county contract, no appetite for babysitting rumor. He had his own fence to mend, his own stove to feed, his own silence to protect. Then he remembered the way Morales had said rigid, the way Nate's hands had shifted while describing the boy, like holding memory physically hurt. He thought of hospice nights when Lila would wake from morphine sleep with eyes huge and bright, seeing pain he could not share, and when nurses asked if she wanted to talk, she would only say, "Not now, because language costs too much." What did his eyes look like? Ray asked. Morales frowned. Excuse me. At clinic. She took a second. Like he was still up there. That settled it. I'll go at first light, Ray said. At the clinic in Pine Hollow, Ben Sutter looked younger than 20. Hospital socks, borrowed sweatshirt, hair hacked uneven where someone had cut out ice-matted clumps. His feet were bandaged white and elevated on pillows. A saline line dripped into his arm. He smelled faintly of antiseptic, sweat, and cold earth. Ray stood in the doorway while Morales handled introductions. Ben, this is Ray Caldwell. He knows the high country. We'd like him to walk your path and make sure there's no danger we missed. Ben's gaze slid to Ray's face and held there too long, searching for something. Permission, maybe. Maybe warning. His pupils were still blown wide despite the bright room. "Did you cross the scree chute west of Sentinel Notch?" Ray asked gently. Ben nodded. "Any rockfall? Fresh slides?" Another nod. "Any people?" Ben's fingers clenched the blanket. "No." "Any animals push you?" "No." "What happened above tree line, Ben?" The change was immediate. His shoulders locked. Tendons stood out in his neck. The monitor clipped to his finger jumped 10 beats in seconds. He stared at the wall, not blinking. Morales started forward, but Ray lifted a hand slightly. "Wait," Ben whispered without moving his lips. "Don't go up there after dark." "Why?" No answer. "Did someone hurt you?" No answer. "Did something follow you?" Ben made a sound like a swallowed cough, then turned his head away and pressed his forearm across his eyes. Conversation over. A nurse entered, reading the room in one practiced glance. "He needs rest." Outside in the corridor, Morales rubbed at the bridge of her nose. "This is what we get every time." Ray looked through the small glass panel in the door. Ben lay still, arm over his face, body taut as wire. "What's he holding back?" Morales asked. "Don't know yet," Ray said, "but it isn't a prank." She handed him a folder, printout map, GPS pings from Ben's phone, search grid, weather logs, times of known contact. "If you see anything we need to close, you call immediately. If there's a threat, we bring in state. Define threat. Anything that puts people at risk." That word, people, hung in the hall like a hook. People meant hikers, volunteers, deputies, tourists once winter brochures went out. People meant budgets and blame and public meetings where maps were waved like weapons. People also meant Ben, shaken silent in a clinic bed. And Ray, old and alone and not as detached as he pretended. By morning, rumor had outrun facts by miles. At the gas station, mountain lion attack, no tracks found because snow machines ruined the scene. At the post office, feral grow operation above the ridge, armed squatters chased him off. At the diner, my cousin says he was abducted by one of those survival cults. At the hardware counter, kid probably took mushrooms and wandered. Ray heard it all while buying propane fittings, saying little. Silence made people fill gaps with their own fear. Fear made crowds. Crowds made mistakes in steep country. By noon, a county commissioner called to ask if Ray could expedite findings before media interest spikes. An outdoor blog had already posted "Mystery in Timberline Basin" with a stock photo of fog and pines that wasn't even local terrain. The county rescue coordinator left a voicemail about volunteer sign-up pressure. The sheriff texted once, "Need your read before weekend." The practical stakes were obvious. If there was an unmarked mine shaft or unstable slope where Ben went down, someone else could die. If there was a violent person sheltering in the basin, every day delayed mattered. If there was no hazard at all and panic kept spreading, the county would still answer it with resources, drones and boots they couldn't afford. But Ray felt another stake he couldn't name cleanly. Ben's refusal had the shape of protection, not evasion. The cedar braid in the evidence bag nagged at him like a splinter under skin. Handwork in the high country meant someone living with old knowledge or old habits, someone who stayed unseen by choice. And then there was his own house, his own life. The missing had emerged at his lower fence out of all the miles of wilderness, as if funneled there. Coincidence likely. Still, when he walked to the east gate that afternoon, he found scuffed snow where many boots had trampled the scene, search tapes snapping in the wind, and one narrow strip of untouched powder under the lowest rail where something, or someone, had slid through without disturbing the top crust. He crouched, gloved fingertips hovering over the mark without touching it. Too smudged to read now, too late. Ray stood and looked up canyon toward the dark line where spruce-thinned and bare alpine shoulder began. Tree line, a border on every map, a simple elevation contour. Below it, timber, shelter, game trails, rules people recognized. Above it, exposure and weather and the kind of silence that made men imagine gods or monsters depending on temperament. He had jumped fires in terrain nastier than this. He had spent nights under nylon while lightning stitched ridges in white. He did not scare easily, but he respected boundaries. The mountain taught that, or killed you. At supper, he ate beans from a cast-iron pot and stale bread by the stove, then set out gear with the ritual precision of old fieldwork. Map case, compass, spare batteries, trauma kit, thermos, coil of utility cord, binoculars, snow gaiters, sidearm he hoped not to touch. He added a second notebook, thinner than the weather log, and sharpened 2 pencils down to clean points. On the counter lay Lila's mug, chipped at the rim. He reached for it, then stopped and took his own instead. Before bed, he stepped onto the porch. The sky had cleared hard and black, stars so sharp they looked cut into metal. Cold moved in slow layers through the pines. Somewhere down drainage, a coyote called once and was answered. Ray listened until the sound died. Tomorrow, he would follow Ben's route to the subalpine edge and read whatever sign the snow had spared. He would look for facts, tracks, slide risk, evidence of human camp, predator pattern, anything that could be measured and reported and filed. He would give the county what it needed to keep people from charging blind into weather. And if he found something that did not fit the tidy boxes town preferred, something older, stranger, or simply not theirs, he would decide then what duty meant. He went back inside, banked the stove, and wrote one final line in the weather book before turning out the lamp. Clear, wind easing, pressure rising, unsettled. He turned out the lamp and the cabin settled around him with the familiar clicks of timber giving back heat. For a long minute he stood in the dark kitchen, one hand on the table, eyes adjusting to the faint ash glow leaking from the stove door. Then, from somewhere high up canyon, came a hollow knock, not sharp like axe on green wood, not the crack of a branch giving under snow. A deliberate, resonant tock that carried, paused, and came again farther off, as if answered. Ray stayed still until the night took the sound back. When nothing followed, he crossed to the mudroom, laid out his boots by the door, and went to bed, fully expecting not to sleep. He slept anyway, in hard, short blocks, waking before dawn to silence and a sky gone pale blue at the window. By 6:30 he had coffee in a thermos, oatmeal half-eaten, and Ben Sutter's GPS track folded inside his map case. The first leg was easy travel through mixed timber, old skid road under shallow crust. By 8:30 he crossed the last marked search grid tape and started climbing into the basin where the county teams had spent 3 days circling themselves raw. He moved at smoke jumper pace, not fast, not slow, each step placed with intent to preserve sign. He paused at every transition, powder to windboard, timber to open bench, talus edge to frozen seep, and wrote small notes in the thin field notebook. 0940. Youth boot print partial, right heel worn lateral edge, heading NE. 1015. Slide alder snapped from heavy wet load not recent. 1048. Old bear scat under crust. No current den activity. The GPS pings led him up a drainage that pinched steep between rib ridges. Above 7,400 feet the trees thinned, spruce giving way to krumholz and exposed stone, and the weather shifted from valley cold to high country bite, air, with no softness left in it. At 11:12 he found the first thing he could not place. A print in a drift shadow where wind had preserved detail. Bare, five-toed, heel distinct. Human shape, but wrong scale. Long, narrow, and deep-set. He knelt, laid his gloved hand beside it, then took off the glove and measured with spread fingers. 17 inches heel to toe. Stride spacing told the rest. Whatever made it had moved upright. Weight forward, balanced, not the side wallow pattern of a bear on hind legs, and not the stagger of an injured person. The return print lay 6 feet ahead, same depth, same clean toe splay, angled slightly as if the maker had turned to listen. Ray scanned for prank artifacts, molded fake feet, snowshoe drag, boot overprint, found none. He photographed it with a scale marker, then circled wide to avoid contamination. 200 yards higher, he reached a pocket of alder that should have been bent random by storms. Instead, several trunks at shoulder height had been drawn together and woven through each other in a tight arch. Live wood, flexed and locked as if braided by patient hands. The joints were old enough to callous not a single event. Intentional structure, no cut marks, no wire, no trail cam straps. He ducked under and stood in the center, where the wind dropped and the air held a faint, sweet rot smell, like turned duff. On the north side of the pocket, half hidden under wind-blown needles, lay bones. Not a scatter from scavenging, not a cached pile from cougar feed. Long bones and ribs set in curved lines, 3 arcs one inside another, open ends pointing upslope. Elk, deer, maybe one sheep's skull weathered pale, arranged. Ray crouched until his knees ached and tried every practical explanation he trusted. School project, ritual from hunters, delusion induced by pattern seeking in old men. The arcs were too clean, and some bones were old enough to have sat through multiple seasons. Someone had tended them. At noon, he radioed in from a ridge shoulder. "Morales, this is Caldwell, at Grid Echo 7 near Upper Drainage." Static, then Dinah's voice. "Go ahead." No immediate evidence of mine shafts or occupied camps. Terrain hazard moderate, wind slab forming on east aspects. I'm continuing to tree line. Copy. Any sign related to Sutter event? Ray looked down at his notebook, then at the slope above where cloud was beginning to gather again. Unconfirmed anomalies. I need another pass before I call it. A beat of silence. Copy unconfirmed. He clipped the radio away and kept climbing. By late afternoon, fog pushed in from the west, thin at first, then thick enough to flatten distance. He reached the subalpine edge where stunted fir gave way to open rock and snowfields, a hard visible border between shelter and exposure. Tree line. Past this point, weather owned the conversation. Ben's track wandered here, GPS points zigzagging like someone in pain or panic. Ray found one place where a knee had punched through crust, beside a scraped boulder streaked with old blood. 10 feet away, a depression under deadfall branches held snapped twigs and compressed needles, roughly human length. He touched the needles, dry underneath despite recent snow, as if something had insulated the bed. Cloud thickened to a grey wall. Light began to leak out of the day. Then came the knock again. One strike from across the basin. A pause. Another from farther right. Then a third behind him upslope. Impossible unless sound was bouncing or more than one source was moving ridge to ridge. Ray stood very still, head turning by degrees. Wind was near calm. No engine noise, no bird alarm, no branch fall. A shape took form at the fog line 40 yards down slope where timber swallowed light. At first he read it as trunk and shadow. Then it shifted weight. Bipedal. Tall enough that its head sat above a low fir bough he knew to be over 7 feet from his last pass through this basin. Shoulders broad but narrower through the chest than he'd expect on a male bear standing. Arms long, hanging loose. Across the front, Through wet hair and fog drift, he caught the unmistakable weight and contour of breasts. Female. She did not advance, did not bare teeth, did not make threat display. She just watched him with the same patient stillness he used on skittish elk, let the other decide whether to run. Ray felt his hand twitch toward the holster and forced it away. Predator protocol did not fit this moment. Nothing in her posture said charge. Everything in it said boundary. They stayed like that for what his watch later said was 58 seconds. Then she took one step backward into the trees, another, and was gone without a sound, larger than snow settling off a branch. The fog closed where she had stood. Ray waited 5 full minutes, heart hammering hard enough to shake his chest straps. When no further movement came, he backed off the ridge the way he'd been taught on unstable fireline. Never turn your back on the unknown. Maintain visual. Retreat with control. By the time he hit denser timber, dusk had gone to black-blue, and the basin felt occupied in a way maps never showed. He hiked out under headlamp, every old instinct lit and arguing with every old rule he trusted. Morning came in sleet. By the time he reached the first print field, yesterday's 17-inch impressions were soft-edged bowls. 2 hours later, they were gone completely, erased by wet snow and runoff. The woven alder arch still stood, but meltwater stripped scent and detail from everything around it. He bagged one hair snagged in bark, dark, coarse, longer than elk guard hair, and marked location for chain of custody, though he knew contamination risk was high now. At noon, the county helicopter came thudding low through the drainage despite his earlier radio note about spooking sign. Rotor-wash blasted powder off branches and sent a cow elk crashing downhill through his perimeter, obliterating half a subtle trail of depressions leading toward tree line. Ray swore into his collar and keyed the radio. "Who authorized air pass in Echo Basin?" Nate's voice answered, strained. "Command wanted visual confirmation on cornices before weekend messaging. Sorry, Ray, pressure's ugly down here. Your bird just blew out what little sign we had." "I know." At the trailhead, he found 2 pickup trucks and 3 volunteers in bright jackets arguing over whether to post warning flyers that said, "Unidentified large predator activity." Ray took the stack from one man's hand, read it once, and folded it in half. "You post this without evidence. You create your own emergency," he said. The man bristled. "Kid almost died." "Kid survived. That's a different fact." By evening, someone in town had started saying Ray found cult symbols in the snow and wouldn't tell because county wanted tourism dollars protected. Another rumor said the sheriff had confiscated his photos. A third said Ben had escaped kidnappers living in old logging tunnels that did not exist in that rock type. Noise multiplied faster than weather windows. Ray answered questions with less and less patience, then stopped answering entirely. On day 3 of sleet and rumor, he climbed a side spur above his own property to check an old fence run from long abandoned grazing allotments, barbed wire and cable snare fragments the county never budgeted to remove. He carried fencing pliers, marking tape, and a coil bag for scrap. Halfway up, near a stand of young fir where wind dumped lee snow deep, he stopped so abruptly his knees barked. A red scarf fluttered from a sapling branch at eye level, tied in a tight square knot he had taught Lila 20 years ago, because she liked knots that came loose with cold hands. He knew that scarf. Wool, faded at one end where stove sparks had singed it, missing since late autumn, when he'd assumed it blew off the clothesline in a storm and vanished into the creek. He had walked for an hour that day looking, then told himself it did not matter because it was only cloth. Now it hung cleanly, deliberate, dry despite weather as if placed recently under shelter and moved out after. At the base of that same sapling lay 3 fresh tracks in powder not yet crusted. bare, long, deep enough to show weight transfer, 17 inches. Ray did not touch the scarf right away. He stood with snow soaking through his pant cuffs and looked around the trees, feeling the prickling certainty of being watched from somewhere he couldn't triangulate. Not hunted. Observed. For how long? Since Ben? Since before? Since the scarf vanished from his line? He untied it at last and fed the fabric through his hands once, slow. It smelled faintly of cedar smoke, not his own. Back at the cabin, he hung it over the chair opposite his at the table and sat down without taking off his coat. The hollow center he'd kept boxed and squared shifted under him like thawing ground. If the thing in the fog had wanted harm, Ben would not have reached his fence alive. If it had wanted secrecy through violence, Ray would not have seen it and walked away. Whatever this was, it had rules, its own, not human, but rules. He needed Ben before county machinery made those rules irrelevant. He drove to Pine Hollow in dusk slush and found Ben no longer in the clinic ward, but in a rented room above the feed store, arranged by his parents for quiet recovery. Sheriff Morales met him on the narrow stair landing, arms crossed. "You shouldn't be here unannounced," she said. "You want facts? I need 5 minutes without a badge in the doorway." He's fragile. He's scared for a reason. Morales held his gaze. "If he tells you there's a human threat and you sit on it, I charge you with obstruction. If he tells me that, I call you first." Another beat. Then she knocked once and opened the door. Ben sat on the bed in wool socks, ankle-wrapped, a textbook open but unread in his lap. He looked up, saw Ray, and his throat worked. Morales said, "I'll be downstairs. 10 minutes." She left, door ajar by 2 inches until Ben rose and shut it fully. For a while neither man spoke. Rain tapped the window. A heater clicked and whined. Ray took the only chair and set his hat on his knee. "I saw something at tree line," he said. "I didn't shoot, didn't run teams at it. I walked out." Ben's face changed, not relief exactly, but recognition. How close? 40 yards, maybe less. Big? Yes. Female? Ray nodded once. Ben sat back down slowly, hands flat on his thighs to stop their shaking. "They won't believe this." "Try me." He swallowed. Started, stopped, then forced words through clenched jaw. "I sprained my ankle above the ridge. Not bad at first, just ugly pain. Then freezing rain came in sideways. I slipped on scree and hit my head. I remember crawling. After that, it's pieces." He pressed fingertips to his temple as if sorting broken film. "I woke under deadfall, like someone built a lean-to over me. Juniper boughs packed around my legs, warm stones tucked at my sides and feet, wrapped in moss or bark so they didn't burn." Ray pictured the depression he'd found under branches, dry despite weather. "I couldn't have done that," Ben said. "I know wilderness basics. I know what I can do hypothermic with one bad ankle, not that." "What then?" "I heard breathing outside, low, chesty," thought Bear at first. "I waited until dawn light and crawled out and ran downhill because my brain was just, get away, get away." He laughed once, a brittle break. "I left one boot in mud, lost the other in talus. I fell a lot. I kept thinking if I looked back I'd die." "But you did look back." Ben nodded, eyes fixed on the carpet. "From a ridge shoulder near the creek fork. I saw them in trees. A big one and a smaller one, maybe adolescent. They stayed parallel to me, never closing distance. Every time I veered wrong, they moved to block that side without coming out. Like herding, like guiding." "Toward water," Ray said. "Yeah, always toward water, then lower toward your fence line. I didn't know it was your place then. I just saw wire and thought road soon." He rubbed his wrist unconsciously. "When I first woke up, this was tied on me." He mimed a loop around his left wrist. That cedar braid. Not tight enough to cut, just there. Like a lead rope. I tore at it when I panicked. Later, near the lower pines, it was gone. I didn't feel them take it. Ray let that settle between them. "Why didn't you tell Dina?" he asked quietly. Ben looked up with sudden heat in his eyes. "Because she'd do her job. Everyone would do their job. Drones, rifles, thermal imaging, news crews, people saying public safety while they kick in whatever door they find. I didn't shut down because I forgot. I shut down because I remembered too much." Rain intensified against the glass, then eased. Ray said, "Did they ever threaten you?" "No." Ben's answer came immediate. "I was terrified, but not because they were attacking me, because I was in the wrong place and didn't understand the rules." The room seemed smaller now, air denser. Tree line, Ray thought, not haunted threshold, but border. Not monster country, not empty wilderness waiting for human explanation. A held line, enforced. He stood, picked up his hat. "Ben," he said, "if County asks again, keep your story to what keeps people alive." Ben gave a tired half nod. "Hypothermia, scrambled memory. That works." At the door, Ray paused. "One more thing, the big one. Did she look at you like prey?" Ben shook his head. "No. Like I was loud." Ray stepped into the hallway where Morales waited by the stairwell, face searching his for verdict. "Well?" she asked. He pulled the door shut behind him. "He's consistent on weather exposure and route errors. No indication of armed persons. Main hazard remains upper basin conditions and bad decision-making above tree line." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. Morales exhaled, tension dropping a notch. "Can you put that in writing tonight?" "Yeah." As he descended the stairs, the red scarf in his coat pocket brushed his wrist like a reminder. Above the tree line, human rules stopped applying. Below it, they still did. And right now, both sides were drifting toward collision because men mistook unknown for enemy. Ray pushed open the outer door into wet cold and made a decision he could not yet explain to anyone, least of all himself. He would hold that line if he could, even if he had to stand on it alone. Rain hissed off the feed store awning and soaked through Ray's hat brim before he reached his truck. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, engine off, listening to water ping the hood and Morales's last question replay in his head. Well, he had given her the answer she could act on. He had kept the answer she couldn't. By the time he reached the sheriff's office, lights were still on upstairs, and 3 county vehicles were parked crooked in the lot. Through the blinds he could see silhouettes moving around a conference table. Somebody had already ordered pizza, cardboard boxes stacked by the trash can. Grease dark on the lids. Panic administration. Morales let him in through the side door. "You said you could put it in writing." "I can." She handed him a legal pad and pointed toward an empty desk in records. "Make it clean. If this goes to commissioners, they'll cherry-pick every vague sentence and turn it into policy theatre." Ray wrote what he could defend in daylight. Weather history, terrain exposure, unstable wind slab development, poor route choices above tree line, evidence of hypothermic confusion. No mention of 17-inch tracks. No mention of woven alder arches or bone arcs or the female in fog. At the bottom, he added one line he hoped would anchor the rest. Recommend temporary restriction of upper timberline basin, seasonal hazard, and redirection of recreational traffic to lower market routes. When he carried it back, Commissioner Harlan Pike was already in the room, tie loose, cheeks windburned and bright, with the kind of urgency elected men wore when cameras might appear. Nate stood by the window with a tablet. 2 state wildlife officers leaned over maps. Pike tapped Ray's report with 2 fingers. "This is useful, Mr. Caldwell, but seasonal hazard doesn't answer what happened to that boy." What happened to that boy is weather plus injury in bad terrain, Ray said. Pike gave a practiced smile. And yet he told law enforcement not to go above tree line after dark. He told law enforcement a lot less than people keep saying. One of the wildlife officers looked up. We've got pressure from Helena. Social channels are loaded with predator event claims. If there's a large carnivore habituated to hikers, we need confirmation before first snow tourism starts. Then confirm with science, Ray said. Not with a circus. Pike bristled. A circus is what we get if we do nothing. We're planning a safety sweep. Thermal drones, daylight grid teams, chainsaw crew for visual lanes where vegetation is dense. One pass, documented, done. Ray stared at him. You run chainsaws near that ridge and every animal in 3 drainages bolts. You won't see what you're looking for, and you'll increase avalanche risk on loaded aspects. Pike spread his hands. Public safety requires visible action. There it was, the antagonist in a county-issued fleece, speaking in budget-approved phrases. Not malice, momentum. Harder to stop. Morales cut in, voice controlled. We can stage lower and reassess. Ray's recommending upper closure, not escalation. Pike didn't look at her. I'm recommending assurance. Volunteers are already mobilizing online, better under our supervision than freelance with rifles. He turned to Ray. Can you support this operation? No, Ray said. I can support rerouting it. Silence held for a beat too long. Then Pike nodded as if filing away a name. By midnight, the county emergency page posted, Timberline Basin, safety sweep, pending weather window. Public advised to avoid unmarked routes. By 12:20, local forums translated it to, officials, hunting unknown threat. At dawn, sleet needled sideways across Ray's windshield as he drove back up canyon. Elk had dropped lower overnight. He passed 2 cows and a calf standing in the county road, steam lifting from their backs, reluctant to yield. A bad sign. Animals moved early when pressure built above them. He spent the morning placing temporary warning placards at spur turnoffs. Upper Basin unstable. Stay below marked trail. At the 3rd junction, someone had already zip-tied a homemade sign over his. What are they hiding? By 10, Nate called over radio. Command approved a partial sweep. Not full. They're saying your hazard report changed route design. Partial where? Lower basins first. Upper boundary if conditions allow. Ray exhaled once. Not victory, but delay. Keep them off east face this afternoon, he said. Sleet loading is ugly. Copy. He spent the next hours cutting old wire from dead fence runs above his property, dropping rusted barbs into a feed sack and flagging what he couldn't pull alone. Twice he found hair clumps snagged at crossing points. Elk, deer, once something darker and coarse that made him stop and look into timber until sleet stung his eyes. At 13:40, his radio crackled with raised voices, then Nate again, breathless. We had a volunteer slip in Lower Aldershot, possible tib-fib, airlift requested. Ray closed his eyes. Where exactly? Nate gave coordinates, too high, too steep, nowhere near the rerouted line Ray had submitted. Why are they there? Ray asked. Someone live-streamed a giant track near the chute. Team lead redirected. Of course. Rumor had become navigation. By the time Ray reached the overlook, the helicopter was already coming in low, rotor wash flaying the slope. Rescue medics loaded a young man whose leg bent wrong under a foil blanket. Around them, 12 volunteers filmed on phones while one shouted into camera about proof the county doesn't want seen. In the churned snow below, any real sign was gone, pulverized. Ray felt something inside him drop out, clean and cold. He had tried procedural restraint, written the report, posted the warnings, given officials a path that protected both people and the line above. And still Spectacle won. That evening, as if to complete the cost, he came home to find tire tracks in his yard and his mudroom door jimmied open. Nothing major stolen. Old binoculars, a flashlight, 2 boxes of 30-30 rounds. But someone had rifled his table drawers and knocked Lila's chipped mug to the floor. It lay in 3 pieces by the chair he never moved. He stood in the doorway for a long time without stepping inside. The loss was small by inventory standards, but when he knelt and picked up the largest shard, thumb tracing the familiar chip at the rim, the room blurred hard enough that he had to sit down on the floorboards and wait for his breathing to even out. He could not fix this tonight, could not unbreak it with competence. Outside, snow began in wet clumps. Morales called close to midnight. "You home?" "Yeah, I'm 10 minutes out." When her headlights came through the trees, Ray expected official business. Instead, she walked in, carrying 2 paper cups and a look he'd never seen on her face. Drawn, hollow, stripped of command posture. She set 1 cup on the table near the broken mug pieces he hadn't moved. "I heard about the break-in. Any suspects?" "Half the county, if social media counts." She sat without asking and wrapped both hands around her cup, though it had gone lukewarm. "I need to tell you something off record." Ray waited. Dina stared at the stove door, watching firelight pulse through the vent slits. When she spoke, her voice was lower than usual, rough at the edges. 8 years ago, before I made sheriff, I was deputy on a winter call-out. 17-year-old kid missing on Elk Crown. Last known with friends, probably drunk, probably showing off. We had a weather warning, and I pushed to delay up a search until daylight, because I didn't want volunteers dying in a night storm. She swallowed. By sunrise he was dead. Exposure. 200 yards from where we staged. Ray said nothing. For 3 years, his mother sent me his school pictures every Christmas. Not with a note, just the pictures. Dina gave a short laugh that broke in the middle. "You know what that does to a person in this job? You stop hearing nuance. Every unknown becomes that kid. Every delay feels like murder paperwork waiting to happen." She rubbed her eyes with heel of hand, hard. "I keep pretending this is about policy because policy is safer than saying I'm scared of being wrong again." The room settled around that admission. Ray looked at her, really looked, and saw the fatigue lines carved deep beside her mouth, the tremor she hid by gripping the cup, the damp in her lashes she refused to wipe. Not an adversary. A wounded official doing triage on a county and on herself. "They're using your fear," he said. "I know." Her answer came immediate. "Pike called state this evening. He wants a full sweep tomorrow at first light. Drones, volunteers, press-safe language, the whole show. He told me if I object, he'll go through emergency management and make me own any delay publicly." "Will you stop him?" "I can slow paperwork. I can't stop momentum now." She finally looked at him. "I don't know what you saw up there, Ray. I'm not asking. But if there's something in that basin people shouldn't provoke, this is the last night before we poke it with a stick." She set a folded copy of the operation plan on the table and stood. At the door, she hesitated, hand on the frame. "I'm tired of choosing between bad outcomes," she said quietly. "And I'm very tired of pretending it doesn't cost me." Then she stepped back into the snow and drove away. Ray unfolded the plan. Staging area 0600 at lower trailhead. Drone launch 0630. Team Bravo to upper boundary if conditions acceptable. Chainsaw line crew on standby. Volunteer cap 32. 32 people plus operators plus aircraft. Enough noise to turn an uneasy border into a breach. He was up before dawn, writing by headlamp at the same table where the broken mug still sat in pieces. He drafted a formal avalanche hazard addendum denser than the first, citing slope angle classes, wind loading, recent temperature inversion, and observed wildlife descent as proxy indicator. He attached photos of cornice fractures and cross-loaded bowls. He sent copies to Sheriff, SAR, Emergency Management, and State Forecaster. Then he drove it in, paper and digital both, and stood in the hallway until a clerk stamped receipt. For 2 hours, nothing. At 9:17, Emergency Management replied, "Addendum received. Route modification under review." At 9:42, Nate texted, "Good news, maybe. Ops rerouted lower basins pending state sign-off." At 10:05, Pike gave an interview outside the courthouse saying, "We take all hazard data seriously while continuing proactive safety operations." By noon, it looked like Ray's strategy might hold. Crew lanes shifted downslope, upper incursion delayed by official caution language. He let himself breathe for the first time in days. At 12:31, a private drone hobbyist posted thermal footage from public airspace, showing large heat signatures moving near treeline at dusk the night before. The clip was grainy, meaningless blobs, but online it detonated. Within 20 minutes, reporters called county lines. By 1 o'clock, Pike announced an expanded verification phase to prevent misinformation and vigilantism. Expanded verification meant exactly what it sounded like: the full sweep, repackaged. Ray read the update on his phone in the parking lot and felt the setback land with blunt finality. The addendum had bought hours, not safety. Process had failed against appetite. At 1400, he went back upslope anyway, not to argue, but to watch. Snow had turned to hard pellets in gusting wind. Near the old allotment boundary above his east pasture, he found fresh churn in the drifts where something large had struggled. One snapped sapling. Drops of blood, bright against white, partially rimed over. Beside them, cable wire half buried and taut, leading into a stand of young fir. Illegal fence remnant, he thought at first. Then he traced the wire and found a crude loop anchored to a buried stake. Snare construction, recent handling marks bright in the metal. He swore softly and crouched lower. The tracks around it were a chaos of prints. Elk slot marks, boot tread from at least one human, and overlaid across both, the long, bare impressions he now recognized instantly. One set full-sized. One smaller, maybe 13 inches, depth inconsistent, drag marks at intervals. Juvenile. The blood trail angled uphill toward darker timber, then vanished where wind had scoured crust to rock. If the cable had cinched and the young one pulled free or broken anchor, it might still be trailing wire. If not free, it might be caught somewhere above, hidden and in pain. Below him in the valley, faint through weather, engines started in sequence at the trailhead staging lot. Ray stood in sleet and did the math he had been avoiding. By dawn, organized teams would be everywhere below tree line, noise and thermal, and men with assumptions. If the young one was trapped now, tonight was the window before the basin filled with human intent. He radioed Nate once. "You have unauthorized snare activity near old allotment line. Fresh blood. Pull your upper teams." Nate's answer came with static and frustration. "Command says copy for law enforcement follow-up. Sweep schedule unchanged." Unchanged gets someone killed. "Ray, I can't!" A burst of noise cut him off. "I can't stop this from my end." Ray clicked off without replying. By the time he reached his cabin, the first true blizzard bands were rolling over the ridge in grey walls, and elk were already crossing his lower pasture in 2s and 3s, heads down, moving fast. He went straight to the shed and pulled what he needed with no wasted motion. Bolt cutters, veterinary first aid kit from his stock medicine shelf, gauze rolls, saline, antiseptic, heavy gloves. From inside the house, he took Lila's red scarf from the chair and looped it through his pack strap. At 17:20, his phone buzzed. Morales. "I got your snare report," she said before he spoke. Wind noise roared behind her. "I'm trying to get Game Warden Authority up there tonight. You won't get it in time. Then stay off that ridge until morning, please. I'm already stretched thin and I cannot run a rescue for you in this weather." Ray watched the tree line darken under blowing snow. If that wire's on a juvenile, morning's too late. Dina's silence on the line lasted 3 breaths. "If you're going anyway," she said at last, voice frayed, "don't make me lie about it." "I won't." He ended the call, shouldered the pack, and stepped onto the porch. Snow came hard now, slanting east, stinging his face. Far up canyon, almost swallowed by wind, a low wooden knock sounded once, then once again, as if answering itself across the ridge. Down below at the county staging lot, the first thermal drone lifted, its red navigation light blinking through storm like a small, mechanical eye. Ray closed the cabin door behind him and started uphill toward the line. Snow came at him sideways, hard enough to sting through beard and collar. Ray climbed by feel more than sight, headlamp beam flattened by white gusts. One hand on the old fence line where it still stood, and the other on the strap of his pack, to keep it from swinging. At the break in the firs where he had found blood, he dropped to a knee and killed the lamp. Dark swallowed him whole for 2 breaths. Then he heard it. A low, wet chuff from upslope, followed by a short, pained bark that was too deep for deer and too rough for elk calf. Not a predator call. Distress. He moved toward it slowly, boots rolling heel to toe to keep crust noise down. 10 yards in, his shin hit wire hidden under powder. He froze, felt with gloved hands, and traced a cable line to a buried anchor stake and a cinched loop. The loop disappeared into a tangle of deadfall. Ray thumbed his headlamp back onto its lowest red setting and saw the juvenile. It was half crouched, half collapsed against a log, one leg twisted forward unnaturally where steel cable had bitten above the ankle. Hair matted with blood and snow, shoulders broad for its size but not yet fully grown. Its eyes flashed amber red in the beam, and it bared teeth with a breathy, frightened hiss. "Easy," Ray said, voice low and even. "I'm not here to hurt you." The cable jerked tighter as it pulled. Fresh blood welled. Ray set the bolt cutters down where the juvenile could see them, palms open. A rumble answered him from his left. He turned his head, not his body. The adult female stood 20 yards out between 2 fir trunks, chest high in the drifting snow, dark hair iced at the tips, face unreadable in storm shadow. Not charging, not retreating. Her hands hung loose at her sides, but the sound in her chest vibrated through the snow under Ray's boots. He lowered his gaze to her hands, exactly as he would with a nervous horse he didn't own. "I see you," he said. "I'm cutting wire, that's all." No movement. Above the wind, a high mechanical whine rose and dipped, drone rotors somewhere below tree line and climbing. Ray swore under his breath. He had minutes, maybe less. He slid the veterinary kit off his pack and inched closer to the juvenile on his knees. It snapped once in the air between them, more bluff than strike, then flinched when the cable bit. Ray kept talking, nonsense cadence, the way he used to calm smoke jumpers shaking after bad burns. Good, stay with me. I know. The loop had twisted with every panic pull, strands biting deeper. He worked the bolt cutter jaws under the tightest section and squeezed. Nothing. Cable too tensioned. He repositioned, braced one boot against the anchor stake, and pulled the trapped leg gently towards slack while keeping his head down. The juvenile screamed, a sharp metallic sound that made the female take one full step forward. Ray held up his free hand without looking at her. One more. One more. He squeezed again. Metal popped. The cable sprang open and slapped snow. The juvenile lurched backward, tried to stand, crashed, then kicked free of the last loop and scrambled three-legged behind a stump. Breath blasted in white bursts. Ray grabbed Celine, flushed the wound fast, red ribboning into powder. Deep cut, swollen, likely tendon bruising, but no obvious bone through skin. He packed gauze, wrapped twice, then reached for clean cloth and came up with Lila's red scarf. He paused only a second. Borrowing this, he muttered to nobody and everybody and bound the scarf over gauze in a broad pressure wrap, not low so it wouldn't rub the joint. Drone whine grew louder. Through the trees below, a faint, blinking red light pulsed in the snow. Ray ripped the snare stake from the ground, coiled the cable and shoved both into his pack. Then he leaned back on his heels, palms on thighs, eyes still lowered. All done. Silence except wind and rotor buzz. The female moved first, 2 long steps to the juvenile, one arm sweeping it behind her body without touching. She looked at Ray for a long, unreadable moment. Snow feathered along her brow ridge. Her breath steamed. Then she bent, set something upright in the snow 3 feet from Ray's knee, and backed away with the younger one sheltered behind her. By the time Ray looked up fully, they were already dissolving into timber shadow, movement so quiet it felt like fog pulling uphill. At his knee, clean and pale against the storm-dark snow, stood a single antler tine. He heard men shouting far below. "Thermal ping just dropped. Move up, move up." Ray snatched the tine, killed his lamp, and slid downslope into the trees. He cut across a game trail he knew better than any county map, and dropped onto a bench above the old logging spur just as 3 volunteers in bright jackets came punching uphill with headlamps and a drone controller between them. One of them, broad-faced, beard iced white, raised a rifle when he saw movement. "Don't!" Ray barked. The muzzle dipped, barely. "Caldwell?" the man said. "You got eyes on it?" Ray recognized him then. Cal Bricks, local contractor, loudest voice on the online safety watch threads. Pike's favorite volunteer because he brought trucks and men. "Turn around," Ray said. "Slope above you is loaded and cracking." Cal pushed past him. "We just got heat signature. Commissioner says confirm and document." "Commissioner isn't standing on this snowpack." 2 more lights bobbed below, Nate and Sheriff Morales climbing hard, with Pike huffing behind them in a borrowed shell jacket that still had tag string tucked in the zipper. Pike pointed upslope. "There, that sector. Move Team Bravo." Morales grabbed his sleeve. "Hold, we evaluate first." "We evaluate by moving," Pike snapped. "Every minute we delay, rumor wins." Ray dropped his pack into the snow, yanked out the coiled cable and blood-smeared snare loop, and held it chest high. "This is what hurt your hiker class, not ghosts," he said. "Illegal steel set above the allotment line, fresh. I just cut 1 victim loose." Cal's face tightened, then flattened. "Could have been old." "Fresh blood says otherwise." Pike's eyes flicked to the cable, then away. "Great, we'll log evidence. Still need upper sweep?" Ray stabbed his pole into the slope beside them and sawed a quick compression column with his shovel, hands moving from muscle memory. On the second tap, the slab sheared clean 6 inches down and shot a fracture line 3 feet across the test face. He turned the block toward Pike. "That's propagation. You put 30 people up there and this hill chooses for you." Pike opened his mouth, closed it, looked to Cal instead. "Take the ridge spine, lower angle." Nate said, "Ridge cornice is worse." Cal started up anyway, boots punching hard. 10 steps, 12. The snowpack let out a deep, gut-level whoomph. "Down!" Ray roared. A soft slab cracked above Cal and peeled sideways. a white sheet breaking free. It wasn't huge, but on that pitch it moved fast enough to sweep a man into the timber runout. Cal vanished to his waist, arms pinwheeling, rifle skidding away. The slab carried him 20 yards and jammed him against a buried log, one leg twisted under. Nate lunged. Ray caught his harness and anchored him with a rope around a fir trunk. Probe left. Don't stack weight. For 90 seconds the world narrowed to breath, shovel strokes, and shouted coordinates. They dug Cal out to the chest, then to hips, then leg. He screamed when they moved him. Tibia, maybe, Nate panted. Morales knelt in snow, checking airway and pupils. Pike stood 10 feet back, face gone grey under sleet. Ray straightened, chest heaving, and pointed at the fracture line still zigzagging above them like a warning signature. "That was a small release," he said. "You want your assurance? There it is." No one answered. From below, more volunteers had stopped climbing, watching the scene in stunned silence. Morales looked up at Pike, voice flat with command now. "Operation is terminated. Immediate. I'm invoking Incident Safety Authority." "You can't just—" Pike began. "I can," she said. "And if you countermand me after a documented slide event, I put it in writing with your name on negligence." Pike's jaw worked. He looked at the gathered volunteers, at Cal crying into his sleeve while Nate splinted his leg, at the cable snare in Ray's hand dripping pink meltwater. He tried one last angle. "Fine. We pull for tonight. State can come tomorrow with professionals." Ray stepped closer, close enough Pike had to focus. "Tomorrow I file this snare with game wardens and chain of custody photos. They'll ask who's been running predator patrol up here with steel and rifles. They'll ask who encouraged civilians onto unstable slopes for optics. You want state attention? Keep talking." For a second, Pike looked ready to swing at him. Then the fight went out of his shoulders in a visible drop. "Get him down," he muttered, nodding toward Cal. Everyone down. Defeat did not look noble. It looked like a man discovering cameras could point both directions. By the time they reached the trailhead, wind had eased but snow kept falling. Straight and steady now. EMTs loaded Cal. A game warden took the snare evidence bag from Ray with gloved care and did not hide his disgust. "Fresh crimp marks," the warden said, rotating the loop under his light. "Who set this? Did it recently?" Morales answered before Ray could. "You'll get names." Pike tried to climb into his SUV without speaking. Morales stopped him with one hand on the door. "Commissioner, I need your statement on record tonight." He gave her a dead look. "Counsel present." "Of course." He drove out without sirens, taillights swallowed by snow. Nate came over face drawn and offered Ray a thermos cap of burnt coffee. "You okay?" Ray looked up canyon where darkness had settled into one long black wall. "Not sure yet," he said. At home he peeled off wet layers in the mudroom and found his hands shaking only when he tried to light the stove. Adrenaline leaving, finally. He set the antler tine on the table beside the broken mug pieces and sat down in Lila's chair, by mistake. He did not move. A knock sounded on his porch just after midnight. 3 slow taps. Human cadence. Dina stood outside with snow in her hair and a file folder under one arm. "Mind if I come in?" He nodded. She laid out papers on the table. Temporary emergency closure order for Upper Timberline Basin. Incident report citing avalanche release. Pending investigation into illegal snare placement. Signature lines flagged. "I can hold this 72 hours under emergency authority," she said, "after that commissioner's vote. They'll fight. They will." She met his eyes. "But tonight, we have leverage." He signed where she pointed. She watched his pen steady itself. Before leaving, she glanced at the antler tine and then at him. You're not going to tell me everything. No. Can you tell me this? She touched the edge of the table, careful. Are we protecting people by closing that line? Yes. Are we also protecting something else? Ray took a breath. Yes. Dina nodded once, as if a puzzle piece finally settled. Then I'll hold the line. After she left, Ray carried the broken mug pieces to the workbench. He cleaned the edges, mixed epoxy, and fitted them together under lamplight with the same patience he used on the split fence rails. The crack showed when finished. It would always show. But it held. At dawn, before sleep could claim him, his phone buzzed with a text from Ben. I heard about the slide, thank you. Sheriff called. I said what we discussed. Ray typed back, stay in school, stay off that ridge. A minute later, I will. Also, I'm sorry I ran. Ray looked toward the dark window where tree line was only a guess beyond blowing snow. You were 20 and freezing, he wrote. Running is allowed. The commissioner meeting 3 days later filled the Pine Hollow courthouse hallway shoulder to shoulder. Ranchers in work coats, search volunteers, 2 reporters from Billings, and a handful of online true crime types with ring lights and hungry eyes. Pike arrived with counsel and a fresh narrative. Isolated volunteer misconduct, unfortunate avalanche near miss, continued need for transparent investigation. He pushed for a controlled Upper Basin Access Day with media observers. Ray waited his turn at the microphone, hat in hand, snow still melting off his boots. He spoke without theatrics. Snowpack profiles, slide data, wildlife displacement, documented illegal snare hazard above tree line, volunteer injury statistics from the past week alone. He did not mention what walked upright. He didn't need to. Then Morales testified. She was calm, precise, and merciless. Commissioner Pike repeatedly pressured field teams to prioritize optics over conditions, she said. I have radio logs. I have time-stamped route deviations triggered by social media rumor. I have 1 injured volunteer and 1 active criminal investigation tied to unauthorized trapping hardware recovered from the target zone. Counsel objected. The chair overruled. Game Warden Ellis stepped up next. Forensics on the cable indicate recent hand crimping with modern tool marks. Not legacy fence, not accidental. Then came Ben, limping slightly, hands shaking as he unfolded a note card. He looked 19 again under fluorescent lights. I was hypothermic, he read. I made route errors. I don't remember events reliably above tree line. I do remember weather turning fast and that I should not have been up there alone. He swallowed. Please stop sending untrained people to prove things. No monsters. No myth. Just enough truth to close the door. The vote was 4-1 for seasonal restriction of Upper Timberline Basin, with authority for Sheriff and SAR to enforce closure until spring thaw and further hazard review. Pike cast the lone number. In the corridor afterward, Pike passed Ray without slowing. You think you won, he said quietly. Ray adjusted his gloves. No, I think we survived this round. Pike snorted and kept walking. Outside, Morales came down the courthouse steps beside Ray. He'll be censured by the ethics board over the volunteer push, she said. Maybe not removed, but clipped. Good. She stopped him at his truck door. You never answered me about that night. I answered what mattered. She studied him, then gave a tired half smile. You're infuriating. Been told. Come by my place Friday, she said. No uniforms, no reports, dinner. We talk like humans. Ray hesitated, surprised by the sudden rise of fear in his chest that had nothing to do with blizzards. Dina saw it and did not look away. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking you to stop living like grief is a job description. He nodded once. Friday. Friday smelled like onions in butter and wood smoke from Dina's backyard stove. Her house was small, rental plain, 2 blocks off Main where plows threw grey berms against parked cars. She opened the door in jeans and socks. No badge, hair loose. "You came," she said, and it sounded like relief. "I said I would." They ate at a scarred pine table under a lamp that buzzed faintly. Beef stew, hard bread, cheap red wine neither pretended to understand. For the first 10 minutes they talked logistics, closure signs, volunteer briefings, Ben's discharge. Then silence settled, not awkward exactly, just waiting. Dina set down her spoon. "I need to say something without getting interrupted by radio traffic." Ray leaned back. "All right. I am tired of caring about you in careful, professional sentences." Her hands were flat on the table to keep them from fidgeting. "When you didn't answer your phone that night, I was angry because you were reckless. Yes. I was also terrified because losing one more person to this job felt like it might finish me." Ray looked at the steam rising from his bowl. "Dina, I know about Lila," she said softly. "Not details. Enough. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm not auditioning for a vacancy. I'm saying I've watched you choose isolation so hard it turned into penance, and I—" She broke off, laughed once at herself, then started again. "I love that you pay attention. I love that you tell the truth even when it costs you. I love that you went up there in a blizzard because mercy mattered more than being believed." The word hung between them, simple and terrible. Love. Ray's throat tightened. He had faced firefronts, rotor wash, and grief rooms without flinching this hard. "You deserve better than a man who still sets 2 coffee mugs out by habit," he said. Dina's eyes shone but did not drop. "I deserve honesty. That's better." He rubbed a thumb along the chipped rim of his wineglass. "I don't know how to do this without feeling like I'm betraying her." "Then don't do it by erasing her." Dina reached across the table, palm up. "Do it by bringing all of you, including the part that still loves her." He stared at her hand for a long beat, then put his own in it. Her fingers were warm, calloused at the trigger crease, steady. "I loved Lila from the day she laughed at my terrible knot work," he said. "I still talk to her in my head when weather turns. I still reach for her mug." He looked up. "And when you drove away the other night, I stood in my kitchen and wanted you to come back. Not as sheriff, as you." Dina let out a breath that trembled on the way out. "That's all I needed." He squeezed her hand once, careful but certain. "I can't promise easy. I don't want easy. I live 12 miles past plowed road. I own chains." Despite himself, he laughed, short, rusty, real. They moved to the couch with fresh coffee. He told her about hospice, about the fluorescent lights and the windows that didn't open. She told him about the Christmas photos from the dead boy's mother and the nightmares she never logged in therapy forms. They did not solve each other. They stayed. Later, at the door, she touched his coat collar to straighten it and said, "We don't have to define this tonight." Ray shook his head. "I want to define one part." "Which part?" "That I'm done pretending I only need work." Dina stepped in and kissed him, gentle and brief and utterly unprofessional. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "Drive slow," she whispered. "Always." He walked to his truck through squeaking cold with a warmth in his chest that felt frighteningly like hope. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in negotiations, hard freeze at dawn, mud by noon, another snow squall at dusk just to remind everyone who owned the basin. On a clear March morning, Ray and Nate pounded closure posts at the Upper Spur Junction, while Morales logged coordinates. The new sign read, "Seasonal Restriction." Upper Timberline Basin, closed, avalanche, unmarked hazards. No mention of monsters. No invitation for thrill seekers. Think it'll hold? Nate asked, tamping post-base with his boot. Ray looked up toward the dark band of trees and the bright shoulder above. Lines hold when both sides respect them. Nate gave him a sideways glance like he almost understood, then didn't press. Another day, Ray and Warden Ellis hauled out 2 more illegal cable sets from an old fence run. Ellis bagged them and said, "Whoever was setting these stopped after arrests." Arrests? Cal Bricks and 1 buddy. Misdemeanor trapping violations, reckless endangerment add-on for carrying in restricted operation. Ellis spat into the dirt. "They'll plea, pay, complain online, but they're done in your drainage." Good enough. On a wet April evening, Ben stopped by on his way back to school, ankle still stiff but improving. He stood awkwardly on Ray's porch with a duffel slung over one shoulder. "I wanted to say thanks in person," he said, "for not making me into a story." Ray handed him a jar of cabin-made jerky for the drive. "Stay off solo winter ridges." "Yes, sir." Ben hesitated. Do you think they know?" Ray followed his gaze to tree line. "I think they've always known where we are." Ben nodded like that answered the right question and headed down to his car. That night, after first thaw rain, Ray stepped out to the woodshed and found a cedar braid laid neatly on the chopping block, fresh and damp, loops tight and even. No tracks he could read in the muddled ground. He set 2 apples on the stump at the edge of the timber and went back inside without looking over his shoulder. Weeks later, on a bright morning that smelled of wet earth and pine pitch, he split lodgepole before coffee, 3 rounds, then 2 after. Same rhythm as always. He pumped the hand well, checked the stock tank, and wrote weather in the black notebook at the kitchen table. This time, before capping his pen, he added a second line beneath pressure and wind. Left apples at line. Received morels. Boundary quiet. The repaired mug sat beside his, crack visible, handle strong. Across from him, the once empty chair was no longer an altar. It was simply a chair, sometimes occupied, sometimes not. Dana's wool cap hung by the mudroom door from her last visit, melting a small circle into the mat. Outside, far up canyon where timber thinned into sky, a single hollow knock carried down the drainage and faded. Ray listened, then went back to stacking wood. Bark side out, ends squared, the old competence still there, but no hollow center left to fill.